Greetings. I'm Brooke Lehrman, Maryland's 34th Comptroller. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar discussing the tax law changes resulting from the 2025 BRFA passed by the General Assembly. Let me start by saying thank you for doing business in Maryland, and thank you for joining us today. Our tax system is one of voluntary compliance, and we are doing our best to make sure that you and everybody else who's affected by any changes in the tax law have the information that you need to comply. Since the end of session, our agency has been hard at work implementing these tax changes that the General Assembly passed during this year's legislative session. The Office of the Comptroller of Maryland has a long history in providing timely updates to Marylanders, informing them of tax changes and updates. And I'm pleased to continue this tradition with some added features, including these interactive webinars, in addition to public outreach efforts, FAQs, one-pagers, and other opportunities our agency is creating to ensure that you have your questions answered. I know that this kind of change can be intimidating, especially if your business is implementing a new tax for the first time, but we're here to make sure you have all the tools you need to make this process as easy as possible. To ensure that you can follow our progress and get further updates, we've created a web page on our new website, marylandcomptroller.gov. This page is dedicated to tax updates from the 2025 legislative session. There, you'll find a recording of this and all other webinars and other important updates from our agency regarding these changes. Thank you again for joining this webinar, and thank you for doing business in Maryland. Your success is so important to us. Our teams are excited to delve deeper into these topics, update you on the process so far, and answer your questions. With that, I'll turn it over to the team. Please stay in touch.
Hello. Thank you for joining our webinar to discuss state tax updates from the 2025 session of the Maryland General Assembly. I have a few just quick housekeeping notes before we begin. First, if you have registered for more than one of our webinars, just want to let you know that we are presenting the same information in each of these webinars. So if you have already attended another webinar, you don't need to attend again unless you would like to. Next, since the end of the legislative session, we have collected questions from stakeholders about the tax law changes, and we've done our best to incorporate answers to those questions into today's presentation. Additionally, we've created a page on our website, marylandcomptroller.gov, which is dedicated to providing information about the law changes. It includes draft regulations and will include additionally some question and answers and other guidance, as well as a recording of this webinar and the slides. Now, we will not, unfortunately, be able to answer questions directly during today's presentation. However, please do feel free to use the Q&A feature if you have a question that we don't address. And what we will do is, based on the information in those Q&As, we'll do our best to incorporate that into future updates in the information that we're publishing on our website. Reminder, please do not include any confidential or proprietary information in the Q&A or the chat. On to the updates. Today, I do want to begin briefly with some updates related to income taxes that passed during the session before moving on to the sales and use tax changes. We know that some of you businesses are employers, and so this may impact your employees as well as yourselves. I'm going to cover the new tax brackets and rates on high income taxpayers, changes to the standard deduction and itemized deductions, and also explain the new capital gains surtax. Next, I'll talk about the expansion of the sales and use tax base through the addition of new taxable services. That's a 3% tax on the sale of data or information technology services and also software publishing services. Understanding that there are many businesses in the technology field that have never had to charge or collect sales and use tax before, I'm going to talk a bit about the sales and use tax generally, including the obligations of both sellers and buyers. I'll talk about the effective date of the legislation and how that impacts contracts in progress, as well as subscriptions. I'll cover some special situations, including sales and use tax exemptions, and then I'll round out the sales and use tax portion with some updates that are on items other than technology. And then finally, I'll turn the presentation over to my colleague who will share some very practical information as well as a walkthrough on opening a sales and use tax account in Maryland Tax Connect, which is our online portal for filing and remitting the sales and use tax. We'll start with the 2025 brackets and the rates. So unless I specifically state otherwise, the income tax changes that I'm going to talk about here in this presentation today are applicable beginning with tax year 2025 and forward. So for tax year 2025, the top marginal rate increases and 2 additional brackets and tax rates are added. What currently is the top rate, 5.75, is now going to be capped at 500,000 for single, married filing separate, and dependent filers, and capped at 600,000 for joint filers, head of household, and qualifying surviving spouses. You'll see that there's a new tax bracket added at the 6.25% rate and the applicable thresholds there. And then the new top marginal rate is 6.5%, and that's for filers with Maryland taxable income in excess of $1 million or $1.2 million, depending on your filing status. Law change permitted the maximum rate that a county may impose has been increased to 3.3%. Interest for the underpayment of estimated tax will be waived for tax year 2025 if there is any underpayment that would not have occurred but for the increase in these income tax rates. And so that's either the state marginal rates or if there are any, a county rate change. We'll talk about the standard deduction next. The minimum standard deduction is increased to $3,350 for individual, married filing separate, and dependent filers. It's $6,700 for joint and head of household, as well as qualifying surviving spouse filers. And just for reference, those are some significant increases over 2024. 2024, the minimum rate for the single was $1,800. And $3,650 for joint. The standard deduction phase-in is eliminated. What that means is that everyone with the same filing status who claims the standard deduction will receive the same deduction amount regardless of their income. Let's talk about itemized deductions next. If you itemize on your federal return, you are permitted to itemize your deductions on your Maryland return. However, beginning with tax year 25, itemized deductions are now phased out for high income taxpayers. If you have federal adjusted gross income exceeding $100,000, if it's married filing separate, or all other filing statuses, federal adjusted gross income exceeding $200,000, that's where the phase out begins. And how this will work is the amount of itemized deductions that are otherwise allowed is reduced by 7.5% of the amount of your federal adjusted gross income that exceeds those applicable thresholds. On to the capital gains surtax, which is new for tax year 2025. The law imposes a 2% surtax on net capital gain that is included in Maryland adjusted gross income if the federal adjusted gross income exceeds $350,000, excluding gains from the sale of the exceptions that are listed here on this slide. I'll point out a couple of the most common ones, but they're all exceptions. So there's an exception for the sale of a primary residence for less than $1.5 million, and also for assets held in certain tax advantage benefit plans or retirement accounts. Net capital gain is the amount as defined and determined under the Internal Revenue Code. So there's not a special Maryland definition. The income threshold, as I mentioned, it's $350,000, and that is the same for everyone regardless of filing status. State income tax will now equal the Maryland taxable income amount multiplied by the applicable rate, plus the capital gains surtax amount, if any, for a filer. The surtax will apply to capital gains that are passed through to individuals from pass-through entities and fiduciaries. So in those cases, the Form K-1 will need to indicate the amount of capital gains being distributed. Now we'll move on to the sales tax updates. Data or information technology services and software publishing services. I'm going to talk first about what is taxable beginning on July 1st, 2025. So the law changes created new taxable services at the 3% rate. What are those services? It's data or information technology services that are described under NAICS or NAICS sectors 518 or 519 or subsector 5415, and also system software or application software publishing services described under NAICS sector 5132. Those are all subject to the sales and use tax effective July 1st, 2025. The services that are subject to the tax, as I just mentioned, they're defined by reference to the NAICS sectors, and NAICS stands for North American Industry Classification System. And specifically, it's the 2022 edition. So services that meet these definitions, they are taxable, whether or not a business reports these sectors as their primary business activity code, or if that's the NAICS sector that's assigned to a particular procurement or contract. If you visit census.gov/NAICS and enter the appropriate code in the search field, you'll get more details. And I've put a snip there on screen so you can see that's what the search box looks like on the census website. And just to emphasize that you need to select the one that says 2022 NAICS search. So done that, and use an example of searching on subsector 5415. And that's what you see on screen here is the type of result you'll get as search results. I've highlighted there, each of those highlighted records is a link, and then you can click on any of the links, clicking, for example, here, 541511, which is custom computer programming. And then here on this slide, you see all the list of activities that are included within that subsector. Wanted to point out to you that this information is available on the census.gov site, but we do understand that that might not be the most convenient for everyone to look to. So in order to assist taxpayers and businesses, we have taken all of the activity descriptions from these relevant NAICS codes that are listed in the bill. And we have included those descriptions in our emergency regulations that are available on our website. And we're also including it in other guidance, including the instructions for the sales and use tax form. So just a reminder, a lot of that guidance is available for you there on marylandcomptroller.gov. We have received some questions about what qualifies as an IT service and what is a digital product. So we're going to, just direct folks to check the list of services. Make sure if you're looking it up on the census site that you do use that 2022 edition. As an example, if you are charging or if you are purchasing packaged computer application software, then as of July 1st, 2025, that is a taxable service. So if you are providing that service, you're required to charge a tax. Or if you are purchasing that service, you should expect to see a 3% tax on your invoice there. Another question we got can you rely on a code if it's used in another context, such as on the tax return or in a procurement document? And the answer is no. Again, check the list of services. Don't rely on codes that, for example, you may have seen for years on a tax return reported as a primary business activity code without checking them. And again, check it against our guidance or check it against the census website. Just to give an example, quick web search for software publishing, that's going to show a lot of results that show subsector 511210 software publishers. However, 511210 is no longer a valid NAICS code in the 2022 edition. That it's been updated, and now software publishers are listed under 5132 in the 2022 edition. So what really matters is the service that you are providing, is it among those that are listed? And if so, you need to charge the customers, or if you are purchasing, expect that you'll be paying the tax on that. Next, I want to talk about who has to collect and remit the sales and use tax. The legislature did not change the foundational sales and use tax laws that we're all familiar with when we buy tangible goods. What they did here, they merely expanded the base by adding some new services to the list of taxable services. And I think that's important to understand in terms of applying the existing law and regulations. The same sales and use tax principles apply, whether you're selling t-shirts or technology. And the Comptroller's office is not breaking any new ground here. We are just trying to assist taxpayers in understanding how the existing law is applying now to the sale of data or IT services and to software publishing services. Vendors, also known as sellers, but Maryland law calls them vendors. Vendors who are selling or delivering tangible personal property, digital codes, digital products, or taxable services in Maryland, they have to register for a sales and use tax account. They're also required to collect the sales and use tax on retail sale unless an exemption applies. There are three categories of vendors who are required to collect the Maryland sales and use tax. The first is in-state sellers who are selling to a Maryland buyer, have to collect in that situation. An out-of-state seller who has a physical presence in Maryland and is selling to a Maryland buyer. And that physical presence, that could be, for example, someone, you're sending employees into the state to perform the service. The third category is remote sellers. And these sellers don't have any physical presence in Maryland, but they are selling to a Maryland buyer. And if that's the case, you need to determine if sufficient nexus exists for the vendor to be required to collect the Maryland sales tax. And that's done looking at certain thresholds. So the seller has to collect if during the previous calendar year or the current calendar year, the vendor meets the following criteria. If they have gross revenue from the sale of tangible personal property or taxable services delivered into Maryland that exceeds $100,000, or if you make sales of tangible personal property or taxable services for delivery into Maryland in 200 or more separate transactions. You can meet either of these two tests, and they both refer to the total of the business activity. We're not talking about sales to one particular customer, it's all the customers to know if you exceed that gross sales amount or the number of transactions. I also want to give you an example of when a vendor does not need to collect the sales and use tax. If you are a Maryland-based vendor and you are selling to a customer who is outside of Maryland, you do not need to charge Maryland sales and use tax. You may be required to charge sales and use tax for the buyer's state, depending on their laws, because they may have similar things to the remote seller provision here, and they may have thresholds that require you to collect tax for the other state. But if your buyer's out of state and they're not located in Maryland at all, then there is not going to be an imposition of Maryland sales and use tax. Some more general information for the sellers and vendors. Vendors must have a sales and use tax license and can be obtained by completing a combined registration application. You can get that by visiting mdtaxconnect.gov to apply. And my colleague is going to give you more details on that later in the presentation. There's no fee for the sales and use tax license in Maryland. It is free to get that. So vendor is a trustee for the state and is liable for the collection of the sales and use tax for and on account of the state. Tax is generally due at the time of sale. We'll give you some exceptions later, but that's the general rule. Vendors must file a sales and use tax return and remit the payment of tax collected on or before the 20th of the month following the month when the sale is made. So the returns are due on the 20th. In order to assist vendors in defraying the cost of compliance, there is a credit, 0.9% of the gross amount of the tax remitted, up to a maximum amount of $500 per return. And that's available if the sales and use tax is remitted on time by the due date. Interest and a late payment penalty can apply if the tax is not remitted timely. Additionally, certain officers and individuals who are responsible for payment of the tax, they may be held personally responsible if the sales and use tax is not remitted to the state. Wanted to give you next a couple of snips just to show on the sales and use tax form the updates we've made. I apologize. I realize it's a little bit blurry, but the gist here is to show you that we have new lines dedicated to reporting information from these services. So your sales, your total sales of data and IT services and software publishing services, as well as the actual tax collected, are going to be reported now on a new line 16. And then likewise, taxable purchases of these services, which are for your use when the tax was not paid to the seller, they are reported on a new line 32. A business can be both a seller of services and a buyer of services. And again, most cases, the vendor is collecting the tax, but just to give an example of a case where perhaps use tax might be due, if you are making a purchase from one of those remote sellers who's outside of Maryland, and say they do not meet those thresholds, they have less than $100,000 in sales in a year and fewer than 200 transactions, then they would not be required to charge the Maryland tax, but you as the Maryland buyer would be required to report the use tax on this line 32. So let's move on now to see who pays the tax. A buyer is one who's responsible for paying the sales and use tax. The buyer typically pays the tax to the vendor, as we said, who collects it and then remits it to the state. If a vendor fails to collect the sales and use tax, a buyer using the tangible personal property, the digital code, the digital product, or the taxable service in Maryland is responsible for remitting the use tax to the state. So as I just mentioned on the last slide, but just to reiterate here, if it's not paid to the vendor, this is where the buyer will fill out on line 32 and report the amount of use tax that they are remitting for their own purchase and use. Next, I want to talk about the effective date of this legislation and the impacts on contracts and subscriptions particularly. First point is that contracts for sales of digital or IT services and software publishing services that are entered into prior to July 1st, 2025 are not subject to the sales and use tax. Proper records must be maintained regarding the date and the terms of sale if no sales and use tax is collected, but the delivery or the payment is made after July 1st, 2025. Next, tax is due on subscription, lease, or other similar periodic payments if they are based on the subscription period. And that's regardless of the length of the subscription, lease, or the date of the subscription or lease was entered into. Each subscription payment period stands on its own, and it's considered to be a separate sale for sales and use tax purposes. So payment for the new taxable services with a subscription period due on or after July 1st, 2025, those are subject to tax at the 3% rate. If you are currently in a subscription and that has monthly payment terms, for example, your May subscription payment does not have the tax. The June will also not have the tax, but the July subscription payment, that should carry the 3% tax on that, as well as months following afterwards. If you are a contractor who purchases data or IT services or software publishing services after July 2025, in order to perform a service that you are delivering as part of a contract that was entered into prior to July 1st, 2025, you must pay this 3% sales and use tax. In that case, your contractor's cost of performance has increased. Just to give a little bit more particular example there. So you maybe have bid on a contract prior to July 1st, 2025, and you've estimated your costs, but you have not yet engaged your subcontractors. You have not yet contracted for services that you need to buy in order to perform your contractual duties. If you do not enter contracts to do that or make those purchases prior to July 1st, 2025, if you do that after that date, then when you buy those things, they will be subject to this 3% sales and use tax. Your costs will have increased. Next, we'll talk about some special situations. The first is exemptions. There are two brand new exemptions that apply specifically to the sale of digital or IT services and software publishing services. The first of those is the sale of cloud computing to cybersecurity businesses. Those are exempt from the sales and use tax. Second is sales to or by certain qualified companies that are located in the University of Maryland's Discovery District. But additionally, there are existing exemptions in the sales and use tax law that may also apply to the sale of these services. To give you a couple examples, sale for resale. If the buyer intends to resell the taxable service in the same form that they are receiving it or they are to receive it, and they haven't used the service themselves, then that buyer can purchase tax-free, and then when they make the ultimate resale, they will collect the tax. Sales to charitable or nonprofit tax-exempt entities. In that case, the vendor is not required to charge a tax if a buyer presents them with a valid exemption certificate issued by the state. When I say valid, that sales and use tax exemption certificate can't be expired. The exemption certificates that the comptroller issues to charitable and nonprofit entities are valid for a period of 5 years, and they do have to be renewed prior to expiration. So you want to check the expiration date if someone is proffering an exemption certificate to you. Government entities are also eligible for sales and use tax exempt certificates. Those do not expire. We also have a scenario for a multiple points of use certificate was created in the law. And a multiple points of use or MPU certificate may be presented by a buyer who determines at the time of sale that the service being purchased is for use both in Maryland and outside of Maryland. The buyer needs to submit an application to the comptroller to use an MPU. And if approved, when the buyer provides a vendor with an MPU certificate, the vendor is then relieved of their responsibility to collect and remit the tax. And it shifts the burden to the buyer to remit the use tax for their use in Maryland by themselves or a member of the affiliated group. If a sales and use tax rate higher than 3% could be applied to a sale of tangible personal property, digital code, digital product, or a taxable service, then the higher rate shall apply to the sale. I know that's a little complex, so we wanted to give you an example here. Software as a service or SaaS that's sold today to an individual, that is taxed at 6% as a digital product. However, SaaS that's sold for an enterprise system is exempt from the definition of a digital product. However, SaaS sold for an enterprise system that is it meets the definition of one of those examples of software publishing, and so it will be subject to the 3% rate beginning after July 1st. So it may in fact be the same software, either sold to an individual or to an enterprise. That enterprise exemption remains in the definition of digital product. So a enterprise sale of SaaS will be subject to the 3% rate. But because it is also meets the definition of a digital product, the rate charged to an individual is going to be the higher of the two. So that will remain taxable at 6%. Want to just round out here with some miscellaneous updates from the legislative session related to sales tax and things that are not related to tech. The sales use tax rate for adult use cannabis increases from 9% to 12% effective July 1st, 2025. It exempts the sale of cannabis between a licensed cannabis business and a registered cannabis nursery from Maryland sales and use tax. So that's a expansion of the B2B exemption to include the registered cannabis nurseries. Cannabinoid beverages are excluded from the definition of food in the realm of sales and use tax, and therefore they are taxable at the cannabis rate. There were a few repeals this year of exemptions. The first repeals the exemption for snack foods sold from vending machines. Note that the exemption does remain in place for sales of milk, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, or yogurt through a vending machine. The exemption for the sale of photographic materials is repealed, as well as custom computer software. The reason for the repeal of the custom computer software exception is because that is now taxable at the 3% rate as one of the new taxable services. Another update restricts the exemption for sale of precious metal bullion or coins to those sales that are occurring at the Baltimore Convention Center only. If the sale takes place somewhere other than the Baltimore Convention Center, those sales are subject to the sales and use tax. With that, I want to thank you for your attention, and just a reminder that we have that dedicated page on our website, and please visit there if you would like to see the regulations or our other guidance, or if you want to replay this webinar or see the slides. And again, please, although we can't answer them live during this presentation, do put in any questions you have if I haven't touched on your issue in the Q&A, and we will try and update our guidance online. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague who's going to show you how to set up new sales and use tax accounts in Maryland Tax Connect. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Before we get started with walking through how to set up a sales tax account in Maryland Tax Connect, I'd like to provide a brief overview of what Maryland Tax Connect is for those that might not be familiar. Maryland Tax Connect is the Comptroller's online service portal for business taxpayers. The agency launched the new self-service portal in February of 2024 as part of an ongoing system modernization initiative, replacing the previous B-File web application. Maryland Tax Connect offers various online services, such as applying for a business tax account, viewing your business tax account information, correspondence history, as well as filing and paying on Maryland business taxes. For those that are new to filing sales tax, today we'll take a look at what you can do now to start preparing to file your Maryland sales tax. For anyone that hasn't filed sales tax, you'll need to apply for the Maryland sales tax account using the combined registration as previously mentioned in the presentation. I'll be providing you with a demonstration of completing that application on Maryland Tax Connect, as well as starting your Maryland Tax Connect profile registration. Once you've submitted your application, you'll then be mailed a sales tax license with your Maryland Central Registration Number on it. Your Maryland Central Registration Number is your Maryland Tax ID. You can't start filing your sales tax until you have been assigned a central registration number. You'll also be mailed a Maryland Tax Connect letter containing a unique PIN. You'll use that PIN to link your tax account to your Maryland Tax Connect user profile. This will allow you to begin accessing your account information on Maryland Tax Connect and filing your sales tax. The combined registration application generally takes 3 to 5 business days to process. So you should allow about 7 to 10 business days for processing and mailing through United States Postal Service. After the demonstration, I'll also provide a screen with additional resources to assist you should you need any additional assistance on Maryland Tax Connect. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at Maryland Tax Connect. Okay, so as you can see here on my screen, this is the Maryland Tax Connect homepage. For additional assistance, we have a message here in the top banner. There is a link that you can schedule a callback appointment. And these callback appointments are for Maryland Tax Connect registration assistance if you need assistance with your profile, or if you need assistance navigating through Maryland Tax Connect to complete a specific transaction. So to complete your combined registration application, you'll simply scroll down to the quick links box and you'll click on the third link here. You'll see combined registration application. So we'll go ahead and click on that link. You'll then be taken to our terms and conditions page. You'll need to click the box down at the bottom middle of the page and agree to the terms and conditions. You'll click next. And then you'll need to enter in your contact information. So you'll go ahead and enter that. We'll click next. And then you're taken directly into the application itself. This is the first section of the application. So you need to select the ID type, which is going to be your FEIN for most businesses. That's your federal tax ID number. You'll then enter in your FEIN. You'll also enter in the SSN of the owner, the officer, or the agent responsible for taxes for the business. You'll select your entity type, which is business. You're then going to indicate whether you're a Maryland resident. You'll select your ownership type, and then you'll enter your business legal name. Moving down the page, you then will need to enter in, indicate whether your mailing address and your physical location are the same. And I'll also point out here, you'll see red asterisks through the application. These are indicators that the field is required. So you must have an entry in each of these fields before you can proceed. We'll enter the mailing address. You'll have to select your Maryland county. And then you have to indicate whether you're adding a physical location. Moving down the page, you'll come to the section that is the reason for applying. If you do already pay Maryland business taxes, such as employer withholding taxes, you would select the option to add an account. That would then add the sales tax account under your existing entity and your other business tax accounts that you have with the state of Maryland. If you are brand new to filing business taxes in Maryland, you'll select New Business. So we'll go ahead and click that box. Scrolling down under the account registration section, you'll check the sales tax box. If you do already have an existing Maryland CR number, you'll enter that CR number in this field. You'll also enter in the date of first sales made in Maryland. And there's also some additional fields that you need to check to indicate what type of sales you are doing in Maryland. Moving down, there's one additional field that you need to complete in this section, and that is where you enter in your NAICS code. I do want to note that the classification that a business reports as their primary business activity code for federal and state income tax purposes is not determinative of whether sales and use tax is imposed on sales of services by the business. Maryland law employs the NAICS business activity descriptions to define the services subject to the Maryland sales and use tax. So we'll go ahead and enter in a NAICS code. And then the last section is for cannabis. So if any of these fields apply to your business, you will enter in the information in those fields. We'll click continue. Oh, I did miss one section. One section that's required. Would you like to add a previous owner? You would need to select one of these buttons here to indicate whether you're adding a previous owner. Okay, now moving forward, we'll click continue. We'll validate our address. And then you need to add two related parties. In one of the previous webinars, it did come up that what if you only have one related party, you can enter that related party twice, but there are two parties required in these fields. Validate your address again. And we'll add another party. Hit continue. Validate that address. And then you'll click save and continue. Here you can elect to receive filing coupons by mail. If you would not like to receive filing coupons by mail, you simply leave this box unchecked. Click continue. And then you're taken to the final page, which is the signatory and power of attorney information. If a power of attorney is completing this application, you would need to check this box and also upload, using this upload button, the Maryland power of attorney form. You'll type in your name again, and that is your electronic signature. Click continue. And then you'll see a summary of your application. You'll just go through and make sure all of the entries are correct. And then you can click continue at the bottom of the page. You'll submit your application by electronically acknowledging and clicking yes. And then you'll see that you successfully submitted your combined registration application. Your combined registration application is assigned a unique confirmation number. And after the demonstration, I'll also provide an email address that you can use if you'd like to check the status of your application in the event you haven't received your sales tax license in the allotted 7 to 10 business days. We'll move back to the homepage and we'll take a look at creating your Maryland Tax Connect profile. So again, on the homepage, we'll go to the quick links box. Creating a Maryland Tax Connect profile is the second link. So you'll click the second link that says create a Maryland Tax Connect profile. You'll again have to agree to the terms and conditions. So we'll click the box to agree. Click next. You'll have to enter in your contact information once again. And here you will create a user ID. This is the user ID you'll use to log into your Maryland Tax Connect account each time. You'll enter in your email address. This email address is used in the event that you have forgotten your password. We also send alerts relating to your Maryland Tax Connect profile. They would go to this email address as well. Okay, and then we'll have an electronic acknowledgement. You'll click yes. And this is the first step in the registration process. This is a registration confirmation number that you're assigned. You're also sent a temporary password. You're emailed a temporary password. So let me grab that email and we'll take a look at it. Okay, and then this is the new user confirmation email. You're sent a unique long password. You can copy that password and paste it into the password field. So we'll go ahead and copy. We'll click login. You'll type in the user ID you created. And then you'll paste the temporary password into the password field. Click login. And then you'll need to select 3 security questions and provide answers to those. These security questions are used in the event that you have to use the forgotten password link. You'd be required to answer all 3 of the security questions accurately, and then you would be sent a temporary password into your email. We'll click save. And then you'll need to paste in that temporary password once again, and you'll create your own password. Your password needs to be 14 characters in length. It should contain an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and a special character. Click save. And then you'll receive a message that your password was successfully changed. This is the last step in the registration process. We'll log in once again with the new password. And then this is the final step in the registration process. If you are doing this now and you haven't completed your combined registration application, this is where you will stop until you receive your Maryland Tax Connect letter in the mail with your PIN on it. But when you do receive that letter, you'll click register as an administrator. And then here you'll see 2 options. You'll see the option to use a PIN. You'll also see the option to use if you do not have a PIN or a PIN is expired. Now, if you are an existing business and you don't have a Maryland Tax Connect profile, you can use this option. You can select the second option here. You'll click next, and then you need to validate your filing history. Once you've validated your filing history, that will link your account to your profile. Now, if you are a new business and you've applied for a new sales tax account, you'll use the first option with the PIN. You'll need that unique PIN. You'll click next, and then here you'll enter in your PIN with your federal tax ID number. So that concludes our demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and share our resource page. Just a minute. Okay, so as you can see here on the screen, these are additional resources should you need any additional assistance with Maryland Tax Connect. On the marylandcomptroller.gov website, from the Business Tax Services page, we have FAQs. We have previously recorded webinars that are more detailed for Maryland Tax Connect, so you'll be able to see all of the features that are available on Maryland Tax Connect and how you can complete all of those. We also have step-by-step guides. We have video tutorials, and they're all centralized on that page. I've also included here the address for the Maryland Tax Connect homepage. That's mdtaxconnect.gov. And again, as I showed in the demonstration, we do have the callback option where you can schedule an appointment that is directly on the Maryland Tax Connect homepage. If for some reason you have not received your sales tax, you've applied and haven't received your sales tax license within 7 to 10 business days, you can check the status of your combined registration application by emailing centralregistration@marylandtaxes.gov. So that does conclude our webinar for today. We hope that the information presented in the webinar you found helpful. And we also do encourage you to visit that webpage. I believe it was dropped in the chat, the direct link to the webpage. We will continue to update Q&As and add additional resources in the near future. So have a wonderful afternoon.